ENRICH Innovation Station, the podcast that keeps you connected with the main news about research, development, and innovation between the European Union and Brazil. This is an initiative by the ENRICH in Brazil and Confap. And follow the sponsor of this initiative on Facebook at ConfabBR and ENRICH in Brazil altogether. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome everyone to this new podcast of the series of ENRICH Innovation Station. It's an initiative of ENRICH in Brazil with the Brazilian National Council of State Funding Agencies, Confap. The objective is to highlight mutual priorities and challenges for the European Union and Brazil in research and innovation. So today we will talk about a very important topic, innovation ecosystems in post-pandemic scenario. Well, for everyone, I'm Carlo. I'm president of the Association of Foreign Correspondents in Brazil. I have the pleasure and the honor of presenting this series of podcasts. Today is the podcast number 9. And today we will talk about this very important, interesting, and as well, I can say, extremely current topic. So the innovation ecosystem in post-pandemic scenarios. And for this reason, we're to analyze this very topical issue. So we have the pleasure, and we are pleased to have here as our guests a series of experts on this topic. First of all, Mr. Fernando Machado, head of the Division for Technology Promotion of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Brazil. Welcome, Mr. Machado.
Hello, Carlo. Hello, everybody who is listening to us today and to my colleagues in this podcast. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure also for us to have you here. And then we have Mr. Leonardo Piccinetti, Chief Executive Officer of Europe for Business Limited. Thank you very much to be here with us today.
Hi, Carlo. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. And we have also Professor Luiz Márcio, Chief of Science, Technology and Innovation Office of the State Funding Agency of Paraná, Fundação Araucária. Thank you very much for being with us.
I'm glad to be here.
Okay, it's a pleasure for us as well. And then we have Dr. Eduardo Felipe Matias, partner at NELM Advogados, Vice President of the Startup Commission of the Order of Lawyers of Brazil in São Paulo, OAB-SP. Thank you very much to be with us.
A pleasure to be here with you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So let's start with the first question to Mr. Machado. Mr. Machado, let's talk about the Brazilian policies initiative to support innovation ecosystems and about the cooperation between Brazil and the European Union in this context of post-pandemic scenario, after the post-COVID-19 scenario. What you can analyze about these points? Brazilian policies initiative and cooperation with the European Union. Please.
Brazilian innovation ecosystems and tech companies in the past few years have gained density and complexity. Half of the investments in startups in Latin America comes to Brazil. And despite the current crisis brought about by the pandemic of COVID-19, the sector is booming. Investments are already bigger than in 2019. The Brazilian government have been enacting several policies to support this growth. I can pinpoint some of them more strictly related to internationalization of innovation ecosystems. Unfortunately, there are a lot of prejudice regarding the Brazilian technological capacities in the international sphere. Therefore, since 2017, the Brazilian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has created an innovation diplomacy program that seeks to show an innovative nation abroad. We don't take just a narrative of a technological country overseas, but we take concrete examples to investors, decision makers, and partners about the Brazilian capabilities. Brazil is still an inward country, mainly because of the size of its market, and because of that, Brazilian technological solutions are not quite well known abroad. We believe that through the internationalization of Brazilian companies, areas of innovation, and research institutes, we can change this mindset. We have some internal work to do as well. Brazilian researchers and entrepreneurs should have a global mindset from the very first beginning of their endeavors. Brazilians still engage less in international partnerships than other nationalities. Brazil and Europe are traditional partners when it comes to science, technology, innovation, and programs such as ENRICH in Brazil help to break down negative stereotypes. Confidence building, however, is perhaps a never-ending task. Researchers and entrepreneurs should perceive a clear value in uniting efforts in human and financial resource with partners overseas. Governments have certainly a role to play in that. International partnership does not come out naturally. However, by uniting our brains and our resources, we could definitely achieve more impactful technological solutions, not only for Brazilian and European societies, but for mankind. The Brazilian government is very much committed to that, and I'd like to invite all our listeners, be them Brazilians or Europeans, to reach out our networks of embassies and consulates to get to know better all the opportunities of connections that are available between Brazil and Europe. Thank you, Carlo.
Thank you very much. So I would like to ask the second question. Let's talk about the European point of view about this same topic with Mr. Piccinetti. I remind to our public that Mr. Piccinetti is a co-author of the study Sharing Good Practices on Innovation, developed under the EU-Brazil Sector Dialogues in Research and Innovation with the Brazilian Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation and the European Commission, so with Dr. Eduardo Matias. So I would like to ask to Mr. Piccinetti the role of research and innovation in support of the Europe's recovery forms for the COVID-19 crisis.
Thank you very much, Carlo. I think it's a very interesting question because from the European side, which is I'm representing from the European expert in this case, is really important moment. What is Europe is currently doing in two different levels. One is the policy. The one, of course, we need to consider as a program level. We need to just remember that in terms of the issues of the investment of innovative SMEs, including a startup, are critical for the recovery plan, which has been adopted the last 21st of July by the European Council of the Government of the European Union. More than 1.8 trillion of the Euro package to contributing the European economic reboot after the COVID. And the research and innovation is extremely important aspect. We need to take in consideration that the economic downturn is be a negative impact on the business R&D and innovation. In particular, the R&D investment is become, for European side, a critical driver of productivity, economic growth, and there will be linked also the collaboration of the global competitiveness in this case. I would like to point out that this is extremely important. The recovery package, which is the European Union has been adopted, is playing an important role to accelerate debt, equity finance to high growth research and innovation startup. That is also mentioned specifically in the study it was done this year. So special attention, of course, we'll be focusing on the emerging technologies and breakthrough innovation, which are extremely relevant to support into the European Innovation Council in this case. We need to take in consideration one important aspect during the pandemic. The European Commission take the leadership to become the European first climate neutral continent to invest coming recovery strategy in a green digitalization of resilience. So that's why we believe that one of the key aspects is extremely important, the link of the European startup and supporting the digitalization of the European Green Deal, which has become an important action plan at member states level to shift low carbon circular economy to achieve the sustainable development goal. One of the aspects I would like to mention that is extremely relevant is the European Green Deal is become a reality now, because this is an important aspect of ongoing call, which is fostering food, energy, transport, climate change, and of course will be linked to the future program of Horizon Europe mission, which is focusing on the climate, cancer, ocean, city, and food system. I would like to mention several points of the discussion. This is extremely important. First of all, in the post-COVID-19, we need to be more resilient, and there will be revised. The new industrial strategy should be address the ability of as European, national, but specifically regional economy that will be important for the internal and external economic shock. Secondly, the role of cities and regions are extremely important to engage all the stakeholders, including citizens, including the new industrial strategy for the new work opportunity. I would like to mention this collaboration between government, universities, actors, territory, and citizens as an integrated approach. And this is extremely relevant, in particular, to make the conclusion that the focus on the European industrial ecosystem must be a multi-governance of industrial policy. And in particular, there will be distributed and not fragmented. So we have a different aspect that we should be also taking in consideration. But also the R&D and innovation funding, which is the most impactful tools to tackle the COVID-19 is extremely important. We need to have more cooperation and coordination between European member states, including international partnering countries like Brazil, including the public-private partnership scenarios. So these public-private investment, including research infrastructures, will be important to address the issues of the post-COVID scenarios. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Piccinetti. And please follow the sponsor of this initiative on Twitter at ConfapBR and at ENRICH_Brazil. So I'd like to ask the third question to Professor Spinosa about the support to innovation ecosystem given by Brazilian states. Please, Professor Spinosa.
Considering the financial support of innovation ecosystem in Brazil, most of this support comes from government at federal, state, and municipality levels. Clearly, we need to do better, go further. As far as financial support is concerned, Brazil investments in research and innovation are less than 2% of annual budgets. Countries like United Kingdom and Germany invest about 11 to 12% of the annual budget. Clearly, we need to attract the private investments. In fact, we need to balance the public with the private investments to support the science, technology, and innovation ecosystems. For instance, in startup innovation ecosystem, I consider them part of the innovation ecosystem, the startup innovation ecosystem. We need to organize the venture capital for development, expansion, acquisition, and so on, while the public investments supports the early and development stages, where the risks are greater. A balanced approach like this can better support the startup life cycle in a systemic way. Also, we can see the investments made in COVID-19. Clearly, the limitation on investments avoided appropriate fight against the COVID. And that can also be a problem for recovery in a post-pandemic scenario. Recent efforts have been made by federal government. The Minister of Science, Technology and Innovation, for instance, allocated about $100 million on research against COVID. Clearly, we need to go further when compared to other countries, as far as the research and technology are concerned. Well, at the state level, where the state funding agencies are concerned, the efforts are quite important. Almost all states provide open calls against the COVID. In Paraná state, for instance, only through the Araucária agency, we delivered a set of calls involved about half of our annual budget. Other states are doing the same. Well, other supporters to foster innovation ecosystems are possible, not just financial support. But it shall be noted that the fostering of innovation ecosystems is not limited to financial dimension. Some other important actions that are undertaken by state agencies must be considered. A main action is to foster the innovation culture itself. Several institutions are already convinced about innovation earnings, but several others still perceive innovation just as a buzzword. That's a great mistake. Other actions concern strengthening the science and technology system of the states. These systems are the basis of high-level innovations ecosystems. Scholarships, science projects, and laboratories installing have been the main instruments to make the systems stronger. Another action concerns the support to the startup ecosystem. More and more, this system is important and balances the original idea of innovation ecosystem. A healthy innovation ecosystem has a healthy startup ecosystem as so. Well, as far as ENRICH and innovation ecosystem, the support that the instrument or the ENRICH can provide, it's very important for innovation ecosystems itself, in both sides, from the European Union and Brazil. The cooperation between Confap and ENRICH can help foster the innovation ecosystem in several ways. New business models, new markets, new networks, better qualification of researchers, the sharing of facilities, soft landing practices, and several other other ways. A close cooperation between Confap and ENRICH can reach a stronger international and qualified asset to access global chains of development based on science, technology, and innovation. Well, smart specialization is a particular and common point for us. We are under the definition of a context-based smart specialization to foster our innovation ecosystems in Paraná. Just to remember in a short sentence, smart specialization concerns better return over investment in science and technology. And Europe have been experiencing for decades the smart specialization with good results. As consequence of smart specialization, we must provide additional effort to identify research themes that are of really common interest, mainly those that can be applied to regional development, creation of wealth and well-being in Brazil. We need to avoid the support just for training or graduate of students based on imported products. That's a clear point for strengthening the cooperation between Confap and ENRICH. Well, how Araucária is dealing with all this, with how we are fostering the Paraná innovation ecosystem. Well, since 2019, we start the implementation of a new funding model that we call NAPI. In English, it means New R&D Arrangements. Well, the NAPs are socio-technical solutions supported by a digital platform. This digital platform we called Araucária. It's a kind of Uber or Airbnb for science and technology in the state. Through Araucária and NAPI, we are able to identify and mobilize intellectual capital, social capital, and infrastructure in all the outer territory of Paraná territory in order to form R&D networks. So the effort is to have research and development networks to deal with problems that of interest of the state. We focus on the creation of wealth and well-being, or in other words, jobs and quality of life. We expect better return of investment in science and technology from Paraná state government using this concept of NAPI and Araucária. And our last desire with this effort is transform the state science and technology system a common, according to the commons theory. It's a theory developed by Professor Elinor Ostrom, who's received a Nobel Prize. So the society see the science, technology, and innovation ecosystem as an asset that can provide solutions for their problems. That's very important in our role today. And finally, just a main observation. Innovation ecosystem must attend to sustainable development in all dimensions of human being: social development, economic development, environment development, cultural development, and above all, human development. So those are our main concerns about the innovation and fostering the innovation ecosystems.
Thank you very much, Professor Spinosa, for your explain. And then I would like to ask to Dr. Matias about, actually it's a co-author with Mr. Piccinetti, about the study. I would like to ask to Dr. Matias, the new legal framework here in Brazil for startups and innovative entrepreneurship. Please, Dr. Matias.
Yes, so the federal government just sent to the National Congress propositions for the creation of a legal framework for startups, which is Bill number 249. And these propositions should be added to the provisions that are set out in Bill number 146, which is already being discussed in the House of Representatives. And the first challenge of those bills is to define startup. And there are two ways to go there. The first is to adopt a more comprehensive concept of startup, which would increase the number of beneficiaries, and that's positive, but it would entail a higher cost, which could make the incentive measures economically unfeasible or make even them less bold. On the other hand, a very narrow definition would allow granting more significant advantage to startups, but would limit the reach of the initiatives adopted, leaving out good part of the ecosystem and reducing then the expected impact on the economy. So it's a matter of public policy. And in the absence of a universally accepted definition of startup, both propositions highlight the need for these companies to be innovative. And the government bill adds two objective conditions. First, to be considered a startup, a company needs to have a gross annual turnover under 60 million reais. And it needs to exist to be registered for less than 6 years. So that's part of the definition. Another thing is that there are some measures to improve the business environment for startups. And these have two main objectives. First, to simplify the entrepreneur's life, and the other is to provide greater legal security for investors. So in the first group, we can highlight the permission for corporations that bill up to a certain limit to make their legal publications online, as well as to replace their traditional books with electronic records. This will cost reduction that will make possible for startups to adopt the form of a corporation, which is preferable by investors. And on the other hand, another measure is aimed to boost investment in startups is foreseen in both projects is the attempt to prevent investors from being affected by the disregard of the invested startup's legal personality. So the objective here is to exclude the investor's responsibility to bear startups' debt, which includes the cases of bankruptcy. So it makes perfect sense. It's not reasonable to think that an investor that has already made a high-risk bet in a startup will risk her assets as well. So this is important. And other relevant provisions that refer to tax and labor obligations are also in those two bills. So, for example, concerning taxes, Bill 146 allows deducting from the income tax calculation base amounts that are invested in startups, among other tax incentives. In the labor context, also there are an important provision that stipulates a variable remuneration for startups and employees, considering the efficiency and productivity of the company, the employee, or even the team. And besides that, the bill accepts the remuneration through a stock option plan. And it's very important because the consolidation of this practice of stock options is very positive since they are an important mechanism for attracting and retaining talent, especially in the case of startups, which almost always need highly qualified labor and have few resources to pay well their employees. Finally, the legal framework intends to enable the participation of startups in government procurement processes. The government proposal creates a special regime for testing innovative solutions in which it is possible to first exempt the presentation of part of the qualification documentation, to exempt the provision of guarantees, to allow the advance payment of part of the contracted price, which is really important for startups. So it ensures the startup the necessary resources to start implementing the project. And this is good for both, right? The government has access to these very creative, very innovative solutions. And the startups, since they are able to sell to the government, which has a great purchasing power, gain scale in their operations, increase their competitiveness. So now we need to see which of these measures will be approved and which will not. And the level of ambition of the discussions that are going now to take place in the Congress will be extremely relevant for the future of the Brazilian innovative entrepreneurship ecosystem.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Matias. I have dozens of questions to ask you and to all our guests, but unfortunately our time is limited for this podcast, so I should finish our registration. But I would like to thank you all our guests for being with us, starting with Dr. Matias. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Pleasure all mine. So thank you very much to Professor Spinosa as well for being with us.
It was my pleasure, Carlo.
Thank you, Professor Spinosa. And thank you for also to Mr. Leonardo Piccinetti. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Carlo. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And thank you for also to Luiz Fernando Machado. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you too.
And thank you for you as well. You are listening us on this podcast on Spotify. I would like to thank you also all our sponsors while the realization of this podcast, starting of course for the European Union delegation in Brazil, as well as the Confap and all other sponsors. And your support is very, very important to our work in order to improve the dialogue between Brazil and European Union in the field of the research and innovation. And once again, thank you very much to you for joining us on this podcast. You can find us on ENRICH, just writing ENRICH on your Spotify, and you can find the entire series of these podcasts. And I will see you on our next podcast. Thank you very much once again, and see you soon.